Welcome to Uncover the Human, where every conversation revolves around enhancing all the connections in our lives.
Whether that's with our families, co-workers, or even ourselves.
When we can be our authentic selves, magic happens. This is Alex Cullimore.
And this is Christina Amigoni.
Let's dive in.
Welcome back to this episode of Uncover the Human. Today we are joined by our guest, Chris Burnett. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks, Christina. Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here.
We're excited to have you. So we'd love to start and give people a little background on who you are. What's your story and what brought you here?
Yeah, so I'm originally from Scotland. I lived there for 20 odd years of my life before moving to Australia for 4.5 years. And currently I live in Canada. My background, I'm a sociology student, a social scientist, and my background has been in social enterprise. So I've done a lot of work in the social enterprise space, which basically, for those who don't know, is it's about how businesses can achieve social and environmental good. So kind of a hybrid between business and charity. So my research and career to date has mainly been focused around that. And yeah, as I say, sociology background, so very much concerned with the bigger picture and society and how we're all kind of fit together. And currently I'm doing some consulting work, but I also have a personal project, which is what we're going to get into, I'm sure, where I've been sort of reconnecting and deepening my connections with the people in my life. And yeah, it's kind of over the past sort of 6 months or so become a real, it's gone beyond just a project, and I'm looking at now at how it can become I guess something more of a professional pursuit, I guess. But happy to go in any direction you want to with that.
Oh, I mean, that personal project sounds excellent. Thanks for giving us a little background, but we know a little bit about the personal project, but it's a super interesting idea to go deep in some relationships. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so it started when I was in lockdown. I was living in Melbourne at the time, and like probably a lot of people, I was doing a lot of reading, and because there wasn't that much else to do. And one of the books I read that year was Tuesdays with Morrie, which is a beautiful little book about what's important in life. And, you know, there's many messages in that book, but the one that stood out for me at the time was the one around connection and the fact that connecting with people, ultimately, that's the only thing that really matters. And I was feeling quite disconnected at the time because we were in lockdown and I was quite homesick. And so this message really jumped out at me, and I decided that I had to do something with how I was feeling from reading the book. And so I started this personal project where for the first year I caught up with 50 people that I hadn't chatted to in a while. So I reconnected with people. It was pretty much a call a week, and it ranged from people I hadn't spoke to in 6 months right through to a few people I hadn't spoke to in about 6 years. And it was just one of those, hey, how's it going? What you've been up to? What's going on in your life? We have these connections, through social media where you kind of get glimpses of people's lives, but it's not until you actually sit down and chat to them that you actually understand what they've been going through and what they're up to. So yeah, that was the first year of the project. I got to the end of that year and decided that I wanted to do something a little bit deeper. And so I started recording conversations with my family and friends, which are like podcasts in a way, except that they're not public facing. So the recording is just between me and the person I chat to. And I fell onto this format, came up with this structure. So there's 3 parts to the conversation. So part 1, I ask them questions about their life. Part 2, we swap 3 words we'd use to describe one another. So kind of swap affirmations, reflect on what you like about the person. And then part 3, we go down memory lane and reflect on our shared experiences, which is just, an incredibly fun thing to do with, especially friends who've had for a long time. There's so many tales and stories to recount. So I've been doing that for the last couple of years. I've recorded 75 of these conversations, and most recently decided to write about it, to share what I've done, to encourage other people to do something similar, because I've experienced so many benefits from doing this project. And I just feel like other people could experience those too if they do something similar.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating project. I remember reading Tuesdays with Maury a long time ago. I think it was probably after college or at some point in my 20s, and I probably read it again in my 30s. And it's interesting because I now actually when I read it again, I remember making a huge impact and really liking it, and I'm now connecting that it was the connection piece that I must have that must have resonated with me. I don't know that it was that clear when I was reading it back then.
Yeah, well, I think it's such a beautiful book because, like, me reading it back then and me probably reading it now, and maybe take something different from it, but also different people will take something different from it, right? It
Yeah.
covers so much. But yeah, that connection piece was what at the time stood out to me. But maybe if I picked it up again now, there's another message that would jump out.
Mhm.
So you mentioned briefly like you got a lot of benefits out of this project. What are some of the changes you've noticed going through this?
Yeah, look, I think the main benefit really is that I now know my family and friends on a deeper level. I know so much more about their backstories, especially friends that I've made as an adult. So friends that I've maybe only known for, let's say, 5 years. I know so much more about them because, I didn't know them at school or didn't know them at university and didn't know their full backstory. And so to actually just sit down and take the time to ask them, I maybe knew little bits here and there, but to put it all together means that I know them on a deeper level. Similarly with like my aunties and uncles, for example, I think that those kind of relationships I've only ever really had in the family setting and not really had much one-on-one time. So to actually sit down one-on-one and ask them about their life, as a kid growing up, like that's been fascinating too. And I feel like I can put them in my head. I can put their jigsaw together a little bit better. So that's been the main benefit, but also just in terms of me knowing myself a lot better. So obviously the three words that we swap with each other, like I've had, 70 odd people in my life give me three words that used to describe me. So therefore I have learned quite a bit about myself based on what people have said. And then there's also a big element to it too, of being vulnerable. So people have opened up to me and I've been incredibly grateful for that. But it's also helped me to open up. So I think when people are vulnerable with you, it makes it easier for you to be vulnerable back the way. And so I feel like I'm a lot more attuned with my own mental health and when I need to open up and how I open up and that kind of thing. So yeah, and then probably the biggest thing of it all is it's been an incredibly fun thing to do, like just in terms of the project and kind of the hobby and things, especially that memories part, but even just hearing people's stories, like it's just an incredibly fun thing. And there's just been lots of laughs along the way. So yeah, that's just some of the benefits I've had. But yeah, those are the main ones that I feel like other people, could and should experience through doing something similar.
Yeah, those are definitely great benefits and good reflection on all the journeys, the role of vulnerability and the connection piece and how that's just giving space, providing space for hearing people's stories and where they actually are and how much we don't do that as much. Just in normal conversations. It's all more transactional sometimes. It's very fascinating. How did you find so given that you had a format, how did people receive that format?
Well, I think because I'd done, as I say, the first year where I'd kind of caught up with people,
Mhm.
I developed this kind of hobby out of it, and people knew that I was doing something.
Mhm.
I would message them ahead of time and say, right, this is going to be a bit different this time. There's these three words that you need to write down that you'd use to describe me, and also write down some memories that we share that come to mind. And I think people, to be honest, were just kind of like, yeah, this is so you. Like, I'm not really surprised that you're asking me to do this, if I'm being honest. And then it's funny, listening back to maybe the first sort of 10 or 15 conversations, the format was kind of there, but not really. So it was a bit like loose and it wasn't as structured as sort of the rest of the conversations have been. But I think people have really embraced it. I mean, the first part where I asked them about their lives, like that always is the longest part. And then we usually, take a break after that. And then the other parts, by then everyone's kind of really opened up and are used to just kind of the conversation that we're having. But that second and third part is very two-way. And so it's very much I'm bringing stuff to the table as well. And that is just feels like a more natural conversation, I suppose, especially the memories part. Funnily enough, the sort of swapping the 3 words feels natural with some friends, but especially with a lot of my guy friends has not felt very natural. And it's something that I've really noticed on a kind of broader level that a lot of the men that I've done this with have maybe felt a bit uncomfortable or just uncomfortable in giving the 3 words, but even uncomfortable receiving the 3 words as well in terms of receiving kind of appreciation. But then afterwards, a lot of them have commented saying like specifically that part was really great. I really enjoyed that bit. And I'm always like, yeah, of course you did, because it's, you know, it's a really nice thing to do. But typically as men, we don't really get vulnerable with one another in that sort of way and really and share what we like about each other. We're more attuned to sort of roasting one another, I guess, is our way of showing kind of that we like each other. But yeah, that's been a real fun observation to make, kind of having gone through quite a few of these conversations. And I feel that it has meant that it's easier for me and my friend to open up to each other like going forward, because we've had this kind of breakthrough almost of being a little bit vulnerable with one another. So yeah, that's been great too.
Oh, that absolutely makes sense. I've noticed that just in general conversations, especially with men, there's at first a lot of defenses. If you make that first parlay and you just reach out and you say the first vulnerable thing, it's amazing how quickly the walls tend to come down. I think there's a lot of desire for having a little bit of closeness, but so little education and or experience in doing so. And so it becomes this like massive thing and nobody wants to take the first step. But if you do it, I have rarely been received poorly with people that I'm at least, partially close with when reaching out there. So it's fascinating. That would be it makes sense that would also kind of reflect in the work that you're doing. And it's I love that 3-word idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a great idea. I know that in the coach training program that both Alex and I went through, and I don't know if they did with you as well, Alex, but when I went through it a few years ago, that was one of the things we had to do was reach out to 4 or 5 people and ask them to tell us what 3 words came to mind when they thought about us, or what 3 words they described what they appreciate about us. And even just thinking on who to ask was a vulnerable exercise for me. And we had to do it, like we had to, either call or send a text message and have an answer within a couple of hours, because then we needed to come back and complete the exercise. And so I remember like even just thinking about like, whose opinion do I actually want? First of all, who's going to respond and do this in the time that I need? And then am I going to want to hear what they want to say? And so then, and then what are the backups? Because of the time crunch in that of like needing an answer within, lunchtime, it was definitely interesting to go through that exercise and then be like, okay. And some people, I remember thinking I'm going to text instead of call, because first of all, I never call, like we communicate via text first and then plan phone calls. So it would be strange for me to just call. And also I knew them that if I put them on the spot, they wouldn't be able to respond at that point. So it was more of a like, here's the request, here's why I need it, here's when I need it back by, if you are willing to do it.
Well, if I ever take one of those courses, I'll already have completed the exercise. So
yes, 70 times
be ready for that
over. I know. You have plenty of those answers.
I remember that. That's one of the first things we did, and that was terrifying.
It was terrifying.
That was terrifying to reach out to people. I reached out to one person instead of the 4 or 5 we were supposed to. So it was like one of the first things we did out the gate. It was horrifying.
Yeah. I think I ended up reaching out to maybe 3 or 4. Yeah, and one was an old boss. So for me, it was like, do I want to know what you actually think about me outside of the professional environment?
So when it comes to the first phase of it, we were talking about people's lives, and you dig into some of their past. Do you have a structured set of questions you like to ask? Is it a little more flexible per person?
So I probably have, and it's interesting because one of the reasons I ended up writing my book about it was because I had a few friends who I had the conversation with ask me afterwards for my set of questions so that they could go and have these conversations. And I honestly hadn't written down questions, but at this point, every time I chat to someone, I probably write down the same, I'm going to say 6 or 7 bullet points. But the majority of the questions come because I know this person, right? This is a family member or a friend, I already know them. And I know there's aspects of their life that I want to know more about. So the questions are quite tailored. So, you know, if a friend has a particular hobby, let's say, that I've never really sat down and asked them about, then I will make sure that is one of the questions I ask. But yeah, there are probably 6 or 7 questions. So I always start with either what were you like as a kid, or tell me about where you grew up and what that was like. And then we go into school. How was primary school? What are your memories of primary school? What are your memories of high school? What did you do beyond high school and why? And then questions around, you know, jobs they've had, and then typically I'll finish up with kind of where are you at right now and what's coming up in the future. So those are kind of 6 or 7 questions there, but everything else in between is based off of me knowing the person and knowing what I want to ask them about beforehand, but also B, what comes up in conversation. I mean, the real magic here is in the follow-up questions, right? So when you ask them about primary school and they start telling you a story and they feature one of their friends or something, it could be like, oh, so how, you know, are you still friends with that person now? Or, you know, that might be one example of, and then that just takes you in a completely different path into talking about friendships that they maybe have still got, or maybe they don't have any friends from school anymore and why that happened. And yeah, all these kind of topics that can just kind of come up because you ask a follow-up question and it leads you down kind of, you know, the more rabbit holes, the better for me in this kind of experience. So that's why I kind of leave it as maybe 6 or 7 questions that have they're kind of chronological really. And I can base things off of that, but really it's more about the specific things I want to ask them and what they bring up in conversation, really.
That makes sense. It sounds like an excellent exercise in just incredible curiosity and continual just listening for what are the important parts, what happens next. If you were to like help people jump into something like this, what are kind of important mindsets they might need to have to step into this kind of activity?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think curiosity, you've just touched on it yourself there. I think you know, you need to be clear on why you're doing this, I suppose. So for me, it was, I want to know more about the people in my life. And that was always been my guiding principle. And that's why I've done everything that I've done up till now with this. So I think if you're clear on that, then it's really easy. It kind of comes naturally once you start the conversation. It can feel a little bit forced to start with. And that's why having a few questions is useful to just kind of guide the conversation. But really, once you get into it, because these are people you know, you'll have a sense of familiarity and trust there already, and you already know how you interact. And so it can feel a little bit maybe structured, but once you get going, it really is just like you're just having another conversation with them over a beer or over a coffee or whatever, but it's just about their life, really. Another thing as well is to be open to friends asking you things in return. So, you know, I've had quite a few instances where friends refused to let me ask another question without me first answering the question that they've just answered. So if we're talking about school, they're like, and I'm like, right, okay, I want to now ask you about, and they're like, hold on, no, you tell me about your experience of primary school. So I think being open to that as well and being open to sharing. So do this with people that you're willing to share with as well. And I think for anyone that's listening that might want to do something similar, so I've written out now a full-on script that people can use that I've got on my website. So people can download that and have that as a kind of, you know, you could just read from that and use the questions on that, and that could be the whole conversation. But I think I would see it as a starting point. People would have that in front of them, so they're a bit confident of like, well, I've got this to fall back on, but really just let it naturally flow. And yeah, as I say, remember the whole point of it is just to learn more about the person you're chatting to. Also, there's been times where maybe things have come up in conversation that people don't want to get into, and that is absolutely fine. There is no pressure from my end on people getting into things that they don't want to talk about. So I think just being open to that as well, in terms of realizing, okay, this is a sensitive subject, let's just move on, and not, you know, feeling like you have to dig into something if someone's, you know, obviously feeling a bit awkward or uncomfortable. Having said that, sometimes sitting in silence and just allowing the person to kind of think if they do want to chat about something, or that's something in and of itself that is quite useful, just to kind of take a moment, take a pause, and then either get into it or move on. So yeah, that's just a few things off the top of my head that would maybe help people wanting to do something similar.
Yeah, very useful for sure. So I'm curious about the recording piece of it, because you said, these were private conversations, not a podcast. So what drove you to want to record them?
I love listening to podcasts. And so I kind of had, the idea of, wow, this is kind of like me doing my own podcast, except imagine if I could do it without any of the needing to edit or market or any of that, and just have a recording. So I think as well, I'd done something similar-ish with my grandma and granda quite a few years ago, where there's an app called StoryCorps, and I'd used that app. It gives you a list of questions. It was very structured in the sense that it just gives you a list of questions, you choose them, and then you base the conversation off of those questions. But I'd done something similar with them, and then my granda has since passed, and I've re-listened to that recording quite a few times, and it's so incredibly vivid to have the audio of them speaking to you, and you feel like you're back in the room. Like, you can look at photos and stuff, but I think actually listening to them is a very different sensory experience. So I had one of those recordings sort of previously, and I think I just came back to that as like, how cool would it be to have all these recordings for everybody in my life? So obviously there's also an element of now having serious material in terms of if I ever need to blackmail any of my friends, I've got their life story on record, and all of that.
Very useful.
But well, yeah, exactly. But so the way I do it is if it's over Zoom or if it's in person, like, we record the conversation, then I just send them the audio file afterwards. And it's up to them if they ever want to listen back to it, but it's in a Google Drive folder. It's just private to them, and they can access that if they want to. A few of my friends have gone back and listened to it. Quite a lot of them have said either I'll leave that for a few years before I go back and listen, or I'll cringe too much at my own voice, I'm never going to listen to that again. So that's totally up to them. But I think that, if you were to listen back in, say, 5 years' time, it's kind of interesting to see how you talk about things, especially in your life at present, when you're listening back. So yeah, I think that the inspiration was just a liking of podcasts and me fancying kind of doing something similar. But also I had this previous experience where I had this keepsake with my granda, and I was like, oh, that would be amazing to have that with other people too.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, because I think about, especially in, now we have everything is digital, so there's a whole different set of challenges in keeping conversations that you want to be able to go back to. Whether it's taking screenshots or, I don't know, all the different ways that you could do that. But I was just talking to my kids about how, back in the first century BC, the internet didn't exist. And when I made friends from abroad through summer camps, we wrote physical letters to each other after we went back home in our respective countries, and how I know I have a couple of boxes hidden somewhere with those letters. And while I haven't done that in a few years, I used to actually go back and read the letters, because it was that memory of remembering that, and the voice piece. It's even more powerful as you described it. It was like, oh, like that's a conversation we had, and instead of just being the memory in my mind, I can actually listen to it again.
Yeah, another part of it is as well, with recording the kind of the third part with the memories and the shared experiences. I mean, that to me is like instant laughter whenever I need it, because there's so many stories there that I've talked about with friends again and again and again over the years. They always come up, but now I have a recording of that of that memory, and so to go back into that and know that it's the most like private special podcast you could have, but to go into it and know that, like, well, if I skip to this part, we're going to start talking about this thing, and that's just going to make you laugh. So yeah, there's that element to it too.
That's awesome. Just having this whole living relic of somebody, of a whole relationship and a snapshot in time. It's also interesting to have that happen during lockdown, given that an interesting soup time for all of us. There was kind of, I don't know. It would be interesting to look back. I haven't even looked back at our podcast episodes that were during that time, but there's a different mind in that lockdown than there is afterwards. I'm curious what you've learned about yourself throughout this journey. What has been some takeaways?
Yeah, I've already touched on sort of the three words to describe that's been used to describe me, and I've kind of, gone back over that and looked at themes that have emerged, and that's been great. And I feel like I have a greater sense of who I am. The vulnerability part as well, as I've talked about, being able to open up, that's certainly been a huge thing for me. But I think it's just generally helped me be a better conversationalist and a better listener as well, because I've just been having so many of these really intentional conversations and holding space and taking the time to sit and listen and engage with people in my life has made me, be, as I say, a better conversationalist, and also the reflective elements. So I wouldn't say I was a particularly reflective person before this project, and now I find myself, intentionally taking time to sit and reflect on something that I'm going through that maybe like I'm struggling with, or something on the flip side, something that's gone really well, and actually sitting and kind of basking in that and appreciating that for what it was, and that achievement. So I think I've just become a lot more able to actually just take a bit of time and not just get the head down and move on to the next thing, but actually, take the time to sort of pause a little bit more. And then, I've developed a habit to keep connections in my life. So, it's not always a call, but it might just be a message. But I'm finding that I'm way more proactive in messaging people and just being like, hey, what's going on? Or sending them a voice note, and just, dumping hey, this is what's going on in my life. What about you? I feel like I've, developed a bit more of a habit into doing that, because that's really important for me in terms of keeping that the sort of the depth of the connection. Because we can follow each other on social media and see what each other are up to, but again, you're not actually connecting. And so I found myself developing that habit, which has been really great as well.
It's interesting because I was about to ask you actually, how have you noticed the changes in the actual connecting? So not the connections themselves being deeper, but in the verb, in the act of connecting with the people that you have interviewed.
Yeah, so as I say, definitely more often. And it's funny enough, literally last night, my mate just called me out the blue, and we had about a half-hour chat. Now, I'm not saying that wouldn't have happened beforehand, but that isn't that uncommon for us to do. And it probably wasn't happening prior to me sitting down with him and asking him about his life. So I feel like it's just led to a little bit more of that, people doing it back towards me as well. And I love it when people reach out to me that I haven't heard from in a while. And I feel like that happens a lot more now because I made the first move, if you like, and kind of took that time to reach out. And reaching out, it can just be a, hey, how's it going? And a couple of messages back and forth, and then that's it for a while. And that's awesome too. It doesn't have to be a full on, let's sit down for an hour and swap stories sort of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. So you say you want to take this project that started as a personal desire during a time where we were all pretty disconnected from each other. So, and you want to make it more of a professional thing. What does that look like?
Yeah, so it started the book that I wrote was never the intention. So I basically did all these calls with the intention of getting to know my family and friends better, and then decided, well, maybe I'll write about it now that I've done a bunch of these. That's been really well received, and I have been sitting since the book came out in November, and I've been sitting trying to figure out where I go next with it. And I finally landed on what it is I'm going to be doing. So as of sometime this year, I'll be starting up this movement to encourage 1 million conversations that deepen connection. And what that looks like is my own podcast, where to start with, I want to share anecdotes from my project, and talk about different themes that have emerged. But the whole aim with it is to encourage others to do something similar. So what I want to be doing as well is get to a point where listeners get in touch with me and tell me about conversations that they've been having based off of these activities. So what I want to do is the sort of the three parts that I mentioned, I'm breaking that up into three different activities that you could do, right? So you could just do the memories part, just do the 3 words part. And the idea would be that eventually it gets to a point where people get in touch and, saying, hey, I went and had a chat with my friend and these are the 3 words that we swapped. And then I read that, would read that out in the podcast. So then other people could go, oh, hey, I could do that. So it kind of, there's this ripple effect of action being taken. And what I want is to get to a point where it becomes fully like, it's not about me anymore, not about my project anymore. It's fully just about other people out there deepening their connection with one another. That's the ultimate goal. And I think with a podcast, with events as well. So having events where I can imagine events that people come to with someone that they know, a friend or a family member, and then they are one of many pairs in the room that are engaging in one of these activities at the time. And then on that night, there's maybe 100 conversations have happened, which again is towards this idea of 1 million. And the 1 million thing is arbitrary, right? It's not about the number, but it kind of, it gamifies it to a point where people can feel like they're participating in something. And then the third thing is, so there's a podcast, there's events, and then the third thing is probably resources. So having, digital, yes, but like I talked about a script earlier that I've got on my website, but I actually think it's going to be way more effective if I can get physical versions of these things, because there's so many PDFs out there, right? Like there's just so much to you can have it on your screen and then it just gets lost within a bunch of tabs or whatever. Whereas having a physical little pamphlet that is a little, maybe it gives you little tips on how to be, hold space or be an active listener or whatever it is, but then also some questions that you could ask. Anyway, this is kind of where I see myself going. I'm not entirely sure what it will look like. Professional pursuit is maybe a bit too strong of a term to put on it at this point. It's definitely just going to be continuation of a passion project. But as long as I'm enjoying doing it, then I'll hopefully just keep going. And I think if I can encourage just a few people to go and have some intentional conversations with their family, with their friends, and then that'll be fully worth it for me. And I already kind of know that I have done that because some of my friends have gone and recorded conversations with their friends. And so even that in and of itself is a win already. But yeah, that's where I sort of see it going in the next, let's say 6 to 12 months.
That's incredible. Love the vision. Love the idea. I think you described it as like a ripple effect. I think there definitely will be a lot of that. It'd be fascinating to see as the numbers start to roll in. Like, what kind of trends might you notice of like what people notice about each other? What are there things that come up a lot in the 3 words that tend to like just what people notice most about people they appreciate? And it'd be really fascinating it's a giant sociology experiment in itself, but that'll be just incredibly interesting to see where this goes. Obviously, if there's anything we can do to help, because that's a wonderful mission, and I love the connection idea. It's very inspiring.
No, thank you. And yeah, what you talked about there in terms of being a massive sociology experiment, as I mentioned at the top, like that's my background. So yeah, there's fully the qualitative researcher in me is like, this is quite interesting. Yeah. But look, I think especially the reconnecting calls, like that's an activity, and then the going down memory lane and kind of talking about your shared experiences, that's an activity. And I think those 2 things are things that people kind of do already, but it's just being a bit more intentional about them. Yeah. And so I think that's what I want to try and inspire is this really practical, doable, doesn't have to take you that long, but getting into habits of catching up with people. And that's the other thing is that when you catch up with someone, it doesn't mean that suddenly you're like fully in their lives all the time and you're chatting all the time. It can just be you once a year you have a little check-in and catch up. But that in of itself will deepen your connection with them, but also will just be a nice thing for you to do. And you'll get loads of like positive benefits from doing it, because it might take you back to a time when you were at university or whenever it was that you met this person. It just kind of like brings up some positive memories. So but big on the sociological experiment part of it too.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting because as you mentioned, it's not about now we have to call each other every day or every week. But there's something that shifts when connections are deepened, where now the absence of the actual act of connecting is no longer as impactful almost. So once we have a deeper connection with somebody and we happen to not talk to them for 6 months, there's no taking it personally. It's like, well, it took you 6 months to call me, or I didn't exist for the last 6 months. It's almost like there's a lot more grace and empathy to the fact that it's life and this is how it is. And yet, when I do pick up the phone or send a message after 6 months or a year, no time has passed. It's like the connection is right back where it was.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I hope is that like what I've seen is with a lot of my friends is that they will now reach out to me. And so what I hope is that by people taking the first sort of step and taking that first piece of action to kind of, instigate a conversation, is that then beyond that, they then see it happen in the other way around, and then you have this kind of two-way thing going on. And that's what I hope to see, because I've seen that. And so this is the whole thing with me starting this movement, etc., is that I've had so many benefits and I want other people to experience these benefits. And there's a whole conversation around mental health, and and I think that deepening connection can lead to more preventative conversations around mental health. Is where I'm kind of seeing this all fall into that space. It's the preventative stuff where, like, I found with mates where I'm having conversations now, and if I'm not having the best time of it, I will just be honest and say that, and be like, yeah, not doing so well at the minute. And that, I can do that in my life with a bunch of people now, because I've made the effort to really like deepen our connection with one another. And it's not maybe just like one or two friends that I can reach out to, but there's just kind of that general, and it's not to a point where it's, at crisis, for example. I think there's a lot of supports out there for people that are, in a really, really bad state, and that's incredibly valuable for them. But I think there's something before that where we can just normalize the conversation of like, I'm feeling a bit flat, or this isn't going so well, or, and I hope that ultimately, I hope that can come out of this as well.
Yeah, that's a huge thing, because I'm sure that in the data is coming out, and there's a lot of articles and pieces that are looking at the research of how loneliness, the more we're technologically connected, the more loneliness is a pandemic. There's deep loneliness that people feel, and especially because there's this myth of connection. There's this almost like image of connection, and with the technology and the social media and the way that we're surfacing, connecting at the surface really, and not at the deeper level. There's also this almost this heightened shamed when we're not feeling great, because, well, look at everybody else's life. They're doing so well. How can I possibly reach out and say that I may not be in a great state right now? Then I'm the loser, or I am whatever the shaming self-language that could come up with that. And so, yeah, I would say that, and there's a lot of talk about it, but also research that the connections, the deep human connections, do have a huge impact on mental health, positive impact, and the lack of negative impact.
For sure.
Yeah. I think Adam Grant just talked about something about loneliness isn't about the quantity of relationships, but about the quality. And this is a great way to step in and start to learn that, build that muscle, as well as build some of those quality relationships. And you've definitely got me sold on reaching out and doing a lot more of this. And kind of, I love that idea of kind of a practice, and it can be very low intensity. Just, let's try out, let's just have a brief conversation if that's what it is, because it's still, that might build into more of a relationship, but you wouldn't have done it if you don't have that first reach out. And either way, still just a good muscle to practice. So if there are people who are feeling, just like that, the nervousness over that first step, what advice might you give them?
Read my book. No, download my script from my website. That's very open and free for people to do. I think that even if you just do one of the parts. So at the minute, the script is the full 3-parter. I'm working on breaking that up into the smaller activities. But even if you just do one of the parts, I think that the easiest thing to do is probably just to catch up with someone you haven't spoke to in a while. And a while could just be a couple of months. Like it could be someone that you you do actually have a regular connection with, but you just haven't spoke to in a couple of months or for whatever. And it's just about sending that message. Sometimes we build up in our head like, oh, but what if they don't get back to me or what? Like, just send the message and see what happens, you know? And if they don't get back to you, that's their loss. You know, so I think, yeah, just sending that message and taking, you know, the time. I mean, if you're one of these people that calls people a lot, then I guess pick up the phone and ring people. But I think, Christina, you made a good point there about where these days we tend to message ahead to arrange the time that we're going to phone each other, which, you know, so yeah, just sending that first message. For me, when I started, I just thought of people that you know, it'd only been a few months since we spoke, and I knew that, you know, if I messaged them, they'd reply and at least say like, yeah, I'd love to, and try and get a call. And not all the people that I've reached out to, I've been able to take the time to have a call with. But I think even just like, if you imagine like someone in your life that hasn't spoke to you, that you haven't heard from in a while, they reached out to you and sent you a message like, hey, how's it going? Would be great to catch up sometime. Like, that's such like a positive thing to receive. So imagine you giving that out. Like, you know, I think that's such a real like nice thing to do. And you can make someone's day just by sending that message. Yeah.
That's true. I do miss, you know, as much as I love technology and cell phones and all the great things that we have. Like, I just remember like the days when it was just, again, you know, 1st century BC, when we didn't have cell phones and it was home phones, and you didn't even have caller ID. And so you just, that was an automatic thing. Is like, you got home from school, you just picked up the phone and started dialing numbers. And so there was no anticipation of the connection. Like, the connection was just surprise every time, or the phone would ring and you would be like, oh, it's for so-and-so and it's so-and-so. But it's that constant, you know, it feels like there was a more intentional way to connect back when, because the only way you could do it was to randomly call and randomly be called without the expectation.
For sure. Agreed.
Yeah. So a couple of last questions is one, where can people find you, especially as you expand all of this into so many other things than the book?
Yeah. So at the minute, I have a shockingly long domain name because I haven't actually bought the domain name that I want yet. But I will share my social media profiles with you guys to put out in the episode description. Yeah. LinkedIn is a good one. Instagram as well. My website. I'll share all that, and people can just reach out if they want to and have a chat. I'm always keen to chat to people who are interested in this. So yeah, and then my book is available on Amazon as well, and there's links to that on my website, and people can actually read a little preview of the book as well before they purchase if they want to. So yeah, I'll share all those links. Unfortunately, at the minute, I can't give you a snappy www.this.com.
It'll be in the description. Easier.
Yeah, so the book is called Conversations: Connecting with People in Our Lives. It's available on Amazon as a paperback and an ebook.
Excellent. Awesome. And then our last question, which we anticipated we would ask, is what's your definition of authenticity?
It's funny that this is the one scripted question that you have, because I wrote my book with two principles. One was simplicity, so less is more. Which is why the book is 90 odd pages. Like, it's incredibly short and sweet, and I've deliberately written it in that way. And it's been great because I've had a couple of mates who don't really read much have bought the book and have messaged me saying this is the first time I've ever read a book in one go. And yeah, that was exactly what I was trying to do with keeping it short and sweet. So yeah, simplicity was one. And the second principle was authenticity. And the kind of tagline I had with that was, if it doesn't feel me, don't do it. But I guess you could flip that and say, like, do what feels me is probably a better way to look at it. But where that kind of came out in the whole book writing process was, I read a lot of blogs and attended a few webinars around self-publishing and around, you know, writing the book is one thing, but it's marketing the book that really is the key thing, right? And pretty much all of them talked about having a social media profile and a presence for the book. So like an author page or the book itself having a social media. And, you know, I toyed with this idea for a while, and I thought, well, yeah, it does make sense. Like, I could, you know, I've got plenty of content. I could, write some stuff. And then I just thought, well, it's not really me though. Like I feel like I would have done it for a few weeks really well, and then it would have dropped off. And so I just decided, you know what, I'm just not going to do that because it doesn't feel me. And I want to be authentic with this. So if it doesn't feel me, don't do it. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer, but yeah, that's probably my definition of authenticity. And I'm interested enough keeping those two principles moving forward with this idea of the whole movement. Yeah, that's two things that I very much always come back to whenever I'm doing something: is does it feel me, and is it simple enough, or am I overcomplicating things?
Really like that. It's a great, it's just a great mantra. Like, does it feel me? If not, don't do it. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Yeah, I'll have to ask myself that question whenever I'm in that crossroads.
Yeah, I got a couple things to ask that on.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining, Chris. Thank you for explaining all this. This is a fascinating project. I'm super excited to see kind of where it goes. We'd love to continue to support it however we can, but that's really awesome. Like, thank you for doing this, and thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah.
No, thanks for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I really appreciate you having me on, and it's been great to chat.
Yeah, thank you.
Great
Very
chat.
inspired. And I have another book to add to my list of books to read. And I know it's going to take me very little to read it. So I'll probably just put it to the top of the list and be like, yeah, these other hundreds and hundreds of pages book are going down.
Yeah, awesome.
That and Tuesdays with Maury.
Yeah, that and Tuesdays with Maury, yeah. And let me know, if you do read the book, let me know what you think of it, because I'm always keen to hear what people make of it.
Definitely will. Yes. Well, and thanks everybody for listening.